The lodge windows were glowing when I pulled into my private driveway Friday night. Inside my locked mountain lodge, the HOA was hosting a paid retreat under my roof, using my fireplace, my kitchen, and my father's great room like it belonged to them. Luxury SUVs blocked the access road all the way down to the first switchback. A printed welcome banner on the porch read Willow Ridge Wellness Weekend. My phone buzzed as the smart lock app rejected my master code. That was their first real mistake. They had not just entered my property. They had touched the gate system, the access logs, and the one control point I still owned completely. Music thumped through the cedar walls. Laughter spilled into the cold mountain air. Snow fell in thin silver lines through the porch light. I sat in my truck for 3 seconds, engine idling, watching strangers carry overnight bags across the deck my father built with his own hands. Then a woman in a white cashmere coat stepped onto the porch holding a glass of sparkling water. Margaret Whitmore, HOA president. Professional smile. Perfect hair. The kind of calm face people wear when they believe paperwork has already won. She looked straight at me and did not flinch. That told me she had expected me eventually. I stepped out of the truck. Gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled like pine smoke, wet wool, and expensive candles drifting from inside the lodge. I could see people through the tall windows. Some were gathered near the stone fireplace. Others stood beside the long dining table where my mother used to set out Christmas breakfast. Someone had moved the old leather chairs. Someone had hung a retreat schedule on my kitchen wall. That small detail hit harder than the cars. My name is Nathan Cole. I own 38 acres outside Silverpine, Colorado, along with the lodge sitting at the top of it. I am not part of Willow Ridge HOA. I never signed their covenants. I never gave them my keys. My father built that place after retiring from 30 years of road work. Every beam had his fingerprints in it. Every lock, camera, water line, and gate controller was registered under my name. Margaret walked down the porch steps, like she was greeting a late guest. "Nathan," she said, her voice smooth over the music. "This is not a good time." I looked past her at the open front door. Warm light spilled over the snow. "You are standing in my lodge." Her smile tightened. "The association has temporary use rights." The words landed flat. Behind her, a man in a fleece vest carried a tray of coffee mugs from my kitchen. Another guest laughed near the fireplace. Nobody looked like they knew they were trespassing. That mattered. Margaret was not just using the lodge. She had sold them the idea that she had permission. I pulled up the smart lock app again. The main door code had been renamed. So had the side entry. The garage keypad showed 6 new guest codes, all created that afternoon. My thumb hovered over the master override. I could have shut every door right then. I did not. Not yet. Because the app also showed something else. The private gate code had been changed too. Someone had reached deeper than the front door. Then Margaret handed me a folded agreement. The folded agreement felt warm from Margaret's hand. Snowflakes landed on the paper as I opened it beneath the porch light. Music continued inside. Glasses clinked. Somebody laughed near the fireplace. The retreat was still moving forward like nothing was wrong. The document looked official at first glance. Clean formatting. Signatures. Dates. A property management authorization near the bottom. Margaret watched my face carefully while I read. She expected the paper to do the talking for her. One detail caught my attention immediately. The name on the authorization belonged to a former property manager I had not worked with in more than a year. I kept reading. The agreement claimed authority to schedule events, coordinate maintenance, and approve temporary occupancy. It never mentioned ownership. That omission mattered. Margaret folded her arms. "You see? Everything was arranged properly." Behind her, a guest stepped outside carrying a retreat welcome packet. The packet displayed a photograph of my lodge on the cover. Underneath the photo were the words "Exclusive Mountain Experience." Another guest walked past holding a branded tote bag. Then another. This was not a private gathering. This was a business operation. The cold air sharpened around me. Pine trees swayed beyond the driveway. Vehicle headlights stretched through the falling snow. I looked down at the agreement again. The signature date stood out. Not because it was recent. Because I recognized exactly where I had been on that day. The property manager listed on the form no longer represented the lodge at that time. Not even close. I slipped the paper into my jacket pocket. Margaret noticed. "I need that back. I need a copy," I said. Her smile disappeared for a second. Only a second. Then it returned. "Our legal team can provide one later." That answer told me she did not want the document examined too closely. Another small detail. Another thing to remember. I walked toward the side of the lodge where the security equipment was mounted. Margaret followed. Her boots crunched through fresh snow behind me. The retreat guests stayed inside. Most never even looked out the windows. They believed they were attending a legitimate mountain event. The camera control box sat under the eaves. Locked. Dry. Untouched. I opened the monitoring app on my phone. Access activity filled the screen. New codes. New users. New schedules. Someone had been creating permissions for weeks. Not days. Weeks. My thumb moved across the timeline. Check-ins. Deliveries. Vendor access. Event preparation. The pattern was larger than a single weekend. Far larger. Then I saw a familiar name attached to one of the administrative accounts. The same former property manager listed on the agreement. That account should have been inactive. It should not have existed anymore. The snow came down harder. Wind pushed across the ridge. Somewhere below the lodge, a shuttle van arrived with another group of guests. Their headlights swept across the trees. Margaret noticed what I was looking at. "This retreat is almost over anyway," she said. I glanced at the screen again. The oldest access record was nearly 3 months old. 3 months. That was when I realized this weekend was not the beginning of the story. Then I opened the reservation calendar. The reservation calendar filled my screen from top to bottom. Colored blocks stretched across weekends going back nearly 3 months. Retreat names. Wellness weekends. Leadership workshops. Executive escapes. Every event used photographs of my lodge. Every booking showed confirmed attendance. Snow collected on my jacket while I scrolled. The cold barely registered anymore. The numbers did. This was not one unauthorized gathering. It was a business schedule. Margaret watched me from a few feet away. She said nothing. That silence was useful. People often reveal more when they stop talking. I opened one of the event listings. A registration page appeared. Professional branding. Payment options. Upgrade packages. Transportation add-ons. The lodge was described as a private mountain retreat center managed through community partnerships. Community partnerships. Not ownership. Not leasing. Not permission. Carefully chosen words. Another detail worth remembering. Warm light spilled through the windows behind Margaret. A group of guests gathered near the fireplace holding matching notebooks. Someone carried a tray of desserts through the dining room. Staff members moved confidently through the building. They acted like they had done this before. Because they had. My phone vibrated. A security notification appeared. Another guest code had just been activated. I checked the timestamp. 8 minutes earlier. While I was standing outside. Someone inside was still creating access credentials in real time. That caught my attention immediately. I opened the activity log. New entries continued appearing. Kitchen delivery access. Guest suite access. Side entrance access. The account creating them all carried the same administrative profile connected to the former property manager. The profile should not have existed anymore. Yet it remained active. More importantly, someone was actively using it. Wind swept through the pines. The lodge sign creaked softly above the driveway. A shuttle driver unloaded luggage from the newest arrival vehicle. Guests stepped into the snow laughing and taking photos. None of them seemed aware they were walking into the middle of a property dispute. They thought they had purchased a legitimate mountain retreat. The realization shifted the situation. This was no longer only about Margaret. Paying customers were involved now. That raised the stakes for everyone. I walked toward my truck and pulled out a charging cable. My laptop powered on with a faint hum. Margaret followed again. "You are making this unnecessarily complicated," she said. I ignored the comment and connected to the security archive. Camera thumbnails appeared across the screen. Front entrance. Rear deck. Garage access. Main gate. Service road. The system had been recording continuously. One thumbnail stood out. The main gate camera. I clicked it. Footage loaded from 6 weeks earlier. A delivery truck entered through the private gate using a valid code. Then another vehicle. Then another. None of them belonged there. I skipped ahead. More events. More arrivals. More guests. Entire weekends had passed without my knowledge. The scale kept growing. Then I noticed something else. Every event followed the same pattern. The gate code changed before guests arrived. The code changed again after they left. Someone understood the system well enough to manage access professionally. That required more than a copied key. It required administrative control. My phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of the former property manager. Then the call disconnected before I answered. The missed call sat on my screen for less than a second before another notification appeared. A voicemail. No message. Just 6 seconds of recorded silence. I stared at it while snow tapped softly against my truck windshield. The timing was too precise to ignore. The former property manager had not contacted me in over a year. Now his name appeared the same night I discovered months of unauthorized activity. Margaret noticed my expression. "Everything all right?" she asked. I slipped the phone into my pocket. "Who is running the administrative account?" Her smile returned immediately. Too quickly. "The lodge has support staff." Support staff. Another answer without an answer. Inside the building, applause erupted from the great room. A speaker had apparently finished a presentation. Through the window, I saw guests gathering around a projection screen. A large logo filled the display. Willow Ridge Executive Renewal Retreat. Underneath it sat a photograph of my lodge covered in fresh snow. The image had been professionally edited, professionally marketed, professionally sold. I walked farther down the porch and opened the retreat website from the reservation page. The homepage loaded instantly. Testimonials. Event schedules. Premium packages. Weekend rates. A gallery filled with photographs taken throughout the property. Some were recent. Very recent. One image showed guests sitting beside the stone fireplace. Another showed a catered dinner in the dining room. A third showed people drinking coffee on the back deck overlooking the valley. The dates beneath the photos stretched back months. Margaret had not borrowed the lodge for a single event. She had built a business around it. The realization settled heavily into the cold night air. Wind pushed fresh snow across the driveway. The retreat guests continued arriving. A couple stepped out of an SUV carrying branded tote bags. Another guest rolled luggage across the porch. Nobody hesitated. Nobody questioned where they were. Everything appeared organized. Legitimate. Established. Then I opened the payment section of the website. My attention sharpened immediately. Every transaction was routed through a company account I did not recognize. Not through the HOA. Not through a property manager. A separate business entity. That changed the picture again. This was no longer simply an HOA overstepping boundaries. Money was moving through a commercial operation. A lot of money. I took screenshots and saved everything. Every page. Every schedule. Every fee structure. Every registration option. Margaret watched me quietly. The snow was coming down harder now. White covered the railings. White covered the parked vehicles. The mountains beyond the lodge had nearly disappeared into darkness. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message from an unknown number. One sentence. No greeting. No signature. Just a warning. Check the termination date. I read it twice. Then a third time. The former property manager immediately came to mind. I opened the agreement Margaret had given me and zoomed in on the authorization section. The date sat near the bottom beside the signature. My eyes moved from the date to my phone calendar. Then back again. The gap was impossible to miss. The authorization had been signed months after the property manager lost authority over the lodge. I looked up at Margaret. For the first time all night, she stopped smiling. Then headlights appeared at the bottom of the mountain road. The headlights climbed the mountain road slowly. 2 vehicles. No emergency lights. No rush. Just steady movement through the falling snow. Margaret watched them the same way I did. Her eyes followed every turn in the road. That reaction interested me more than the vehicles themselves. If she was confident in the agreement, the website, and the retreat operation, there was no reason to look concerned. Yet she did. The first vehicle stopped near the lower parking area. A man stepped out carrying a laptop bag. The second vehicle parked behind it. Another man followed. Neither looked like retreat guests. Neither carried luggage. They walked toward the lodge entrance without speaking to anyone. Margaret immediately excused herself and headed inside. That told me enough. I stayed where I was and watched through the windows. Warm light spilled across the snow. Inside, people continued talking, drinking coffee, and attending workshops. The retreat schedule remained posted beside the stone fireplace. Everything looked normal. Yet a small group had formed near the kitchen. Margaret stood with the 2 newcomers. Papers appeared. Phones came out. Something had changed. My own phone vibrated. This time the caller left a real voicemail. I stepped back toward my truck and played it. The voice belonged to the former property manager. He sounded nervous. His message lasted less than 20 seconds. Nathan, if you found the agreement, do not trust the dates. Call me before you do anything else. Then the recording ended. No explanation. No details. Just urgency. Snow tapped softly against my jacket as I replayed the message. The timing matched the text warning. Check the termination date. I opened my records app and searched for the management contract. The files loaded slowly through the mountain signal. Contract. Amendment. Renewal. Termination notice. Then there it was. A signed termination document dated 14 months earlier. Clear. Final. Documented. The property manager had no authority after that day. None. Yet the agreement Margaret handed me carried a signature dated months later. I zoomed in. Compared documents side by side. The difference was impossible to ignore. My pulse remained steady. Evidence works best when it speaks for itself. I called my attorney, Ryan Mercer. He answered on the second ring. I explained what I found. The unauthorized account. The retreat bookings. The payment system. The termination date. Ryan went quiet for several seconds. I could hear keyboard clicks in the background. Then he asked a simple question. Have you changed anything yet? No. Good. More typing. Do not touch the locks. Do not revoke access. Not tonight. I looked toward the lodge. Music drifted through the trees. Guests were gathering for an evening session. Why not? I asked. Ryan's answer came immediately. Because right now they are documenting their own case for you. I watched another group of attendees arrive through the front door. Their welcome packets displayed the lodge logo. Their registration badges carried retreat branding. Cameras recorded everything. Access logs recorded everything. Payment records recorded everything. The operation was still running. Then Ryan told me the one thing I had not considered. Nathan, how many weekends do you think this has been happening? Ryan's question stayed with me long after the call ended. I looked back at the lodge glowing against the snow-covered hillside. The retreat schedule taped beside the fireplace listed workshops through Sunday afternoon. The website calendar showed events stretching back nearly 3 months. The access logs reached just as far. 3 months was only what I could prove from the records sitting in front of me. The real number might have been larger. Music drifted through the trees. A burst of laughter came from the great room. Guests carried mugs of hot chocolate past windows that belonged to my family. The scene looked peaceful. The data told a different story. I climbed into my truck and connected my laptop to a stronger signal booster. Snow collected along the edges of the windshield. The security archive loaded faster this time. I began pulling reports. Gate access. Door activity. Administrative changes. Camera snapshots. Every category revealed another layer. One administrative account kept appearing everywhere. The former property manager's profile. The same account created guest codes. Modified schedules. Approved deliveries. Authorized vendors. Yet according to the termination records, that account should have been disabled 14 months earlier. It should not have existed. A detail near the bottom of the report caught my attention. The administrative profile had not acted alone. A second account appeared repeatedly beside it. The username was partially hidden, but the initials were clear. MW. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Margaret Whitmore. The timestamps placed her account inside the system for weeks. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. Snow rattled softly against the truck roof. I exported every report and saved duplicate copies. Then I checked the camera archive again. This time I focused on event preparation days. Trucks arrived carrying catering supplies. Staff unloaded signage. Boxes of branded materials entered through the service entrance. One camera angle showed volunteers hanging retreat banners across my front porch. Another showed guests posing for promotional photographs beside the stone fireplace. The operation looked organized because it had been rehearsed. Somebody had treated the lodge like a permanent venue. My phone buzzed. Ryan had sent a short message. Preserve everything. Do not interfere yet. I understood why. Every hour created more records. More proof. More confirmation. I opened the payment section again and followed the transaction trail farther. Registration fees. Premium upgrades. Transportation packages. Merchandise sales. The amounts were not enormous individually. Together they painted a much larger picture. The retreat operation was generating real revenue. That revenue depended entirely on access to the lodge. Access they did not legally control. A fresh gust of wind shook the pine branches overhead. Snow slid from the roof in thick sheets. Across the parking area, I noticed one of the men who had arrived earlier carrying the laptop bag. He stepped outside and made a phone call. His posture looked tense. He paced near the railing while glancing toward Margaret inside. Then he handed her his phone through the doorway. She listened for less than 30 seconds. Her expression changed immediately. The confidence vanished. She turned and looked directly toward my truck. Then she hurried back inside and gathered a small group near the kitchen. Something had shifted. Someone else had discovered a problem. Then an email notification appeared on my screen. The email arrived at 10:43 that night. I almost ignored it. The sender name meant nothing to me. No company logo. No signature block. Just a subject line that read Access Audit. Snow continued falling outside the truck. The lodge glowed against the dark mountainside. Music still drifted through the trees. I opened the message. Attached were 3 files. The first was a spreadsheet. The second was an exported access report. The third was a short note. I read the note first. Whoever sent it knew exactly where to look. The message contained only one sentence. Compare the weekend codes to the event invoices. I immediately downloaded the files. The spreadsheet listed retreat dates, registration totals, package upgrades, transportation fees, merchandise purchases. Every event was there. The access report listed gate activity, door entries, and administrative changes. I placed the files side by side and started matching dates. Within minutes a pattern emerged. Every major event corresponded with a new round of access codes. Every retreat generated new credentials. Every retreat generated revenue. The operation was tied together more tightly than I realized. Then I noticed something even more important. Several invoices listed guest capacities that exceeded the number of registered attendees. Empty slots. Extra access codes. Additional permissions. Somebody had been creating more credentials than the events required. That detail bothered me. I followed the timestamps deeper into the records. The same administrative profile appeared again and again. The former property manager account. Right beside it sat the initials NW. The two accounts worked together almost perfectly. One created permissions. The other approved them. Outside, a fresh group of guests gathered around a fire pit near the deck. Their laughter carried through the cold air. They looked relaxed. They looked happy. None of them knew they were standing inside the center of a growing legal mess. My phone buzzed. Ryan again. I answered immediately. He had already reviewed some of the files I sent earlier. His voice sounded focused. Nathan, do not lock anyone out yet. I looked toward the lodge windows. You keep saying that. Because every hour helps us. Papers shifted on his desk. The retreat is generating evidence faster than they can hide it. I watched Margaret through the glass. She was meeting with the same small group near the kitchen. The atmosphere inside had changed. Smiles were thinner. Conversations were shorter. Whatever phone call she received earlier was still affecting them. Ryan continued. Tomorrow morning most of those guests will leave the property for scheduled activities, correct? I opened the retreat itinerary. Guided hike. Mountain photography walk. Wellness excursion. Departure from the lodge at 9 o'clock. Return shortly before noon. Looks that way, I said. Ryan went quiet for a second. Then he said something that immediately sharpened my attention. Good. That gives us a clean timeline. I looked down at the access controls on my laptop. The master override sat exactly where it always had. Untouched. Waiting. Snow slid from the roof above me in a heavy sheet. The lodge lights reflected across the white landscape. Then another notification appeared. This one came directly from the security system. A new batch of guest codes had just been scheduled for deactivation Sunday morning. Sunday morning arrived under a pale gray sky. Fresh snow covered the deck railings and the tops of the parked vehicles. The retreat guests gathered outside shortly after breakfast. Cameras clicked. People adjusted backpacks and winter jackets. The guided mountain excursion was the first activity on the schedule. Exactly as Ryan expected. I watched from my truck while groups followed retreat staff toward the trailhead beyond the lower ridge. The lodge slowly emptied. Laughter faded into the trees. Engines started as shuttle vans carried another group toward a photography site farther down the mountain. By 9:30, only a handful of organizers remained inside. The timing could not have been cleaner. My phone rang. Ryan was already on his way with 2 deputies and a stack of documents. His voice stayed calm. Everything still following the itinerary? Exactly. Papers rustled on his end. Good. We are moving forward. I looked at the access control screen. The master override sat ready beside the gate controls and building permissions. Months of records. Months of unauthorized activity. Months of retreat registrations. Every file was saved in multiple locations. Every screenshot was backed up. The snow reflected the morning light so brightly it almost hurt to look at. Then another notification appeared. A payment receipt. One of the retreat guests had upgraded to a premium package less than an hour earlier. The transaction timestamp landed directly inside the active event window. Another piece of evidence. Another record connecting revenue to the property. Inside the lodge, Margaret moved quickly between rooms. She was making calls now. Lots of them. Staff members gathered near the front desk. Their confidence from Friday night was gone. The atmosphere had shifted. They sensed pressure even if they did not know its source. Around 10:45, Ryan arrived. The deputies followed behind him. No sirens. No drama. Just quiet professionalism. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they crossed the parking area. Ryan reviewed the documentation one final time. Access logs. Administrative accounts. Payment records. Termination notices. Registration materials. The pile kept growing. One deputy glanced toward the lodge entrance. "That is a lot of paperwork." Ryan nodded. "That is the point." Shortly. Before noon, the first hikers returned. They came down the trail laughing and talking about the snowfall. More guests followed behind them. They approached the front entrance expecting a normal end to their excursion. Instead, they found deputies standing near the porch and Ryan holding a folder. Confused conversations spread through the group. Several guests pulled out phones and opened reservation emails. Others showed registration confirmations. The questions started immediately. Who owned the lodge? Who operated the retreat? Why were deputies here? Margaret stepped outside and attempted to answer. Then Ryan handed her a notice. Her eyes moved across the page. The color drained from her face. Around us, guests began comparing receipts, confirmation emails, invoices, and package upgrades. The paper trail was suddenly impossible to ignore. I looked down at my phone. The master override was still waiting. Then Ryan gave me a small nod. Ryan's nod was all I needed. I opened the access control panel on my phone and entered the master credentials. The system responded instantly. Years earlier, when the lodge security network was installed, I insisted on keeping one override that could not be transferred, delegated, or reassigned. It remained tied directly to me. Every temporary code. Every guest credential. Every administrative permission flowed through that system. I selected the unauthorized accounts first. The former property manager profile disappeared from the active list. Then the secondary administrative account vanished as well. Around me, conversations continued on the snowy porch. Guests compared reservation confirmations and payment receipts. Deputies reviewed documents. Ryan answered questions calmly. Nobody was shouting. Nobody needed to. The records were doing all the work. I moved to the gate controls next. The private access road remained open for departing visitors, but all future scheduled permissions were revoked. Every retreat credential scheduled beyond that weekend disappeared from the calendar. Months of future bookings evaporated in seconds. Margaret watched from the porch. Her eyes followed my phone. She understood exactly what was happening. The operation she had built depended on access she never truly controlled. The mountain air felt cleaner than it had all weekend. Snow reflected the afternoon sunlight across the valley. One guest approached Ryan holding a printed invoice. Another produced a registration package. Soon there were dozens of documents. Upgrade fees. Transportation charges. Event confirmations. Promotional materials. Every piece pointed back to the same retreat operation. The paper trail had become impossible to explain away. Margaret attempted to speak with several guests, but they were asking their own questions now. Questions about ownership. Questions about authorization. Questions about who had accepted their payments. The answers were no longer simple. By late afternoon, vehicles began leaving the property. One by one, the parking spaces emptied. The branded signs disappeared from the entrance. Boxes were loaded into SUVs. Staff members carried supplies out of the building. The great room finally fell quiet. The fireplace crackled softly behind the windows. For the first time all weekend, the lodge felt like itself again. Ryan stood beside me near the porch railing. "You handled that exactly right," he said. I looked across the snow-covered acreage stretching below the ridge. Pine trees swayed in the distance. The private gate stood where it always had. Secure. Controlled. Mine. A few days later, the retreat website vanished. Future events disappeared from the calendar. Refund discussions followed. Investigations followed after that. I never needed to raise my voice. I never needed to make a scene. The access logs, payment records, camera archives, and termination documents told the story better than I ever could. On the first quiet evening after everything ended, I sat alone beside the stone fireplace. The lodge smelled like cedar, coffee, and old wood again. Outside, fresh snow drifted through the porch light. The silence felt familiar. It felt earned. I looked at the security app one last time before setting down my phone. Every active credential on the property carried exactly one name. Mine.